Our January webinar is Mastering Iris Reports, Protecting Reimbursement, and Reducing Audit Stress. And today it's myself, Katie Garrity, and our CIO, Chris, that will be covering Iris Reports. Let's take a look at the agenda for today. So we will be looking at Iris Reports through 5 pillars. So these are the 5 critical pillars of GME reporting, and these will serve as our roadmap to Iris success. So during the webinar, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. If they're about a particular pillar, we'll try to address those before we move on. If not, we do have time saved at the end for a Q&A. So before we get started, we have 2 brief announcements that we want to share. First is the upcoming ACGME conference in San Diego. So this will be a nice change, I know, for Chris and I and the rest of the office in Philly to be able to go to a warmer climate and see all of you. So we will be at booth 116. So if you're going to ACGME, if you could put a thumbs up in the chat, we'd love to see who's joining this year. And one thing that we will be previewing at ACGME is a new product we have called Medtrics Neo. So February is all about launching this product, introducing it to our customers and future customers. And Neo is a comprehensive training companion for administrators. So this is in addition to the platform that you already work in. And this offers a variety of courses and learning paths with guided instruction with Medtrics. So these courses allow you to take your knowledge to, we'll say, an expert level. So you have guided learning in the system as well as access to the knowledge base. So all of our help articles and videos that you're used to accessing through Medtrics, those are also in Neo. So every resource is at your fingertips. So let me pop into Neo really quick and show you what that looks like. So Medtrics Neo is a living resource. This is something we will always be updating and adding more modules, more learning paths to in order to better assist your programs. So let me take you to the Academy. And these are those modules that I was speaking about. Refresh. So we have modules that mimic the platform. So when you're in Medtrics and you have your left-hand navigation, we have a module for every one of those. So, for example, let's search for Iris since it's important for today. We have a module on GME Finance and Iris cost reports. And you can track your progress through all of the modules. You can receive a certificate when you've completed all of them. And let's dive into this module to see what it looks like. So within each module, you have a variety of sections that walk you through Medtrics and the topic that you need. So you'll see a variety of screenshots, video clips, and then at the end of each section, we even have a knowledge check. So if you want to cheat and steal the correct answers, they are on the screen right now for Iris. But this is just a quick check to check your knowledge from that module and your experience in the platform. So in addition to this, we have segments. So if you want a GME focus, if there's a particular persona, like an institutional administrator or a program administrator, you can filter down that way. And then we also have learning paths that we will be expanding. So again, you can focus just on modules and content that are important for GME versus UME or other roles. So this is a really exciting tool that we're launching. And again, if you're at ACGME, stop by. We will have it up and running for you to look at. And if you're a current client and you would like access, just reach out to our team and we will get you added. Now let's get back into why we're here, Iris reporting, and Chris is going to kick things off with Pillar 1, institutional setup.
Thank you for that intro, Katie, and you showed off Neo there. And I saw actually that in the header for Neo in this section about Iris, we actually labeled it as demystifying, which is kind of how I like to do this webinar, and for a lot of reasons. But what it comes down to it is Iris involves finances. Whenever money is involved, stress is higher, right? That's just kind of how it works. And ultimately, there's not that much to it. It just feels like there's more on the line. So what I like to do in this webinar is just go over kind of like the high level view of what's actually happening here and how simple it really is when you break it down into its components. So that's what I'm going to try to do here today. And of course, feel free to ask questions as we go along. So we'll get into the institutional setup in a little bit. But first, I want to talk about what is Iris. So especially if you're viewing this on a recording and you're newer to metrics or you're newer to the position that you're in at a GME institution and you're just learning about, well, what is Iris? Well, it actually stands for something. It's Intern and Resident Information System. That's basically what it stands for. So it's a very old program from the government offered through the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And it's basically how a lot of the funding for GME programs comes in, right? So basically, for the time that you spend in educating a resident or a fellow, you get reimbursed by the government through a series of calculations. It's different depending on your region. There's all kinds of accounting stuff related to it. But ultimately, it's about you have one resident, how much of that time in a given year did they spend at your institution? And you get to claim some amount of money for doing that. And that's where the funding for a lot of this comes from the government. And ultimately, you want to have really accurate data that you end up giving to them. And some institutions have a more direct kind of approach. Others hire consultants to help them put together the IRIS reports. It varies. A system like Medtrics is at the heart of the data. So our job is to make sure that whatever data you pull out of our system is going to be nice and clean. And everyone that works on it later, whether it's your own finance team or some external third-party team, whoever it is, they'll be able to make sense of it and it's nice and clean for them. So that's super important because if you provide data that has, errors in it, and a very simple error is, well, this resident is scheduled to two places at the same time. We know that can't happen. So there's an error. And when you have errors like that, it can come back and that can cause delays in you getting that reimbursement. And that's where the trouble really starts, right? So the whole point is to kind of get it right the first time. And we have a number of systems in place in Medtrics to help you do that. But before I get too much into that, let's talk about what data actually exists in Medtrics for this and how it works. And so when you really break it down, this whole scary thing that is Iris, this season that GME institutions have, really just comes down to user demographics and schedules. 2 thumbs up for Fonzie. But I didn't mean to do that, but you had to. But that's ultimately what it is. We need to know who this person is, where they went to med school, what kind of program they're in, and how far along they are into that, and then their schedule. Where were they this year? And if you have those two pieces of information in Medtrics, Medtrics will do the rest. We'll generate the report. You'll send it off to whoever you need to, and that's it. So, when you're feeling stressed about, oh, we have our internal iris audit coming up, we have a third-party audit coming up. Ultimately, it's just demographics and schedules. So you just kind of ground yourself in that and realize that if I just get those two things right, we're done. There's actually not a whole lot more to it. And so we'll start with a little higher level view, though, which is the institutional setup. So depending on your role at the institution, if you're a program coordinator, you work more on that program level, you might not see a whole lot of this, though the data that you create in your program will flow into this. And this initial setup is defining what your fiscal years are. So basically what the period of time is that we're reporting on. Who are the employers in the system? And employers is just language that says, what are these entities that will actually get the reimbursement from the government? So who's cashing the check when it comes, right? That's the employer. And lastly, how are my sites linked back to employers, which is an important concept that some folks do get hung up on a little bit. So let's go look at the system now. And Katie, just confirm for me when I switch, you're seeing Medtrics now, right?
It's
Okay,
this.
perfect. So this is high level setup. So you'll see that I'm on the institution portal. So probably if you don't have this button, you probably don't need to be there. You don't need to worry about this so much because this is like a more or less a one-time setup that gets updated every once in a while if needed, but otherwise it stays pretty much the same. So if you have Iris enabled in Metrics, you'll find it down at the bottom here. You can see Iris at the very end. Go ahead and click on that, and we're going to go look at employers and years. So we'll start simply with fiscal years here. I just have one example in the system, and it's really simple. It's just a date range, right? It's your fiscal year. And usually there's two types, right? Some schools, or not schools, but GME programs will have a fiscal year that aligns with the academic year. So July 1 to June 30th the next year. That tends to make things really easy because it's easy to understand, right? It's like, okay, we have 1 year of residency that equates to the fiscal year. You don't run into any interesting situations where, okay, what happens if the resident is on a rotation that spans 2 fiscal years, right? Now you're thinking differently. Luckily for you, Metrics handles that situation automatically, but it does add just an extra bit of brain power to thinking about everything, splitting things across fiscal years. So you'll either probably have a fiscal year in line with your academic year, which for IRIS purposes makes it easier, but a lot of institutions don't, right? They have a fiscal year. Some it's a calendar year, others it's something else. Ultimately, Metrics doesn't care. We just need to know what it is. And then we handle the rest based on the schedules that you add for everyone. And I just have the one default fiscal year, not academic year here. And you can edit it, delete it if you need to. And adding a new fiscal year is really as simple as clicking the button and putting in the 2 dates. So I'm not going to belabor that point. So first thing, you want to get your fiscal years in there. Feel free to put the next 10 in there. It'll work automatically as we go through time. More important, though, is the employer. So we talked about how these are basically the entities that get the check, right? So ultimately, the schedules that you're entering for all your residents, they need to feed back up into these employers. That will be done through sites. But before you can worry about that, you have to create your employers. So let's say we have Metrics Hospital here, put the name in, and this is really the important thing here, the provider number, right? So this is a number that is issued to your institution. That is how this IRIS system from the government identifies that institution. Oh, that's you. That's who we're looking at. That's who we send the money to, right? So you want to make sure that employer provider number is correct. And then otherwise, just create them. And you can see I have a number here. And then the last step from at least this initial setup is creating your sites. So these are the actual locations, right? So for some institutions, it's pretty much the employer is the site. It's a kind of a one-to-one relationship, and that's it. We'll make the one site, everyone rotates through here, and that's done. But in other cases, maybe you have multiple sites where you are claiming the time when the resident goes to that site. You have your clinic, you have your main hospital, you have some third-party thing as well that you have a deal with that, I get to claim that IRIS time, whatever it is. All of that is handled under sites. And you'll find that on the left nav here. So if we go to sites, you can see I have a number of different sites. So in our little test data here, our residents go all over the place. Some of these are going to be linked to the employers that we track. Others may not be. That's okay. Basically, if you don't have to produce a report for that site about where does this money go, you don't have to worry about it. It's someone else's problem. But you also want to make sure that for all the sites where you can claim the time, you are linking them up with those employers so that the money goes where it needs to go. And so I'll just make a site here just so you can see it. So when you create a site, let's say we're making like an internal site, you can see you have this employer drop down here, and that's where you get this right. So basically, hey, I'm going to claim this. Metrics Hospital is claiming anytime when our residents go through this site. Just click it here, create the site, and that's done. So there's no more you need to worry about from the institutional setup side. So get your fiscal years in, get your employers in, and I'll just preface by saying for a lot of our clients, there ends up being one employer. Basically, it's us. We care about the sites that we get reimbursement for, and there's only one employer. You only need to do multiple employers if you're an entity that actually organizes yourself that way. We do have clients that have that where it's one institution, but technically, financially, there's multiple employers. So you do have to consider that. But for the vast majority, it's typically not that complex. So we've done our original setup there, our institutional setup. And so we're on to the next thing. So this is where we start to get more into the nitty gritty. So we were high level there. Now we're taking one step down. And this is that demographics piece I talked about, right? So ultimately, it's kind of this initial setup. Then you have demographics. Then you have the schedules. So we're going to talk about the demographics now. So there's a couple of things that you want to get right. So the demographics that I'm mostly talking about, besides the obvious, someone's name, their social security numbers, so the system can identify them, stuff like that. It comes down to their education history. That's what we're collecting. Iris does a number of things with that data to identify how many years of training the resident has already had, and so on. So that's what we want to enter here, and we're going to do that through the resident's education page, and we're going to talk about a couple of best practices while we're there. So going back into the system, we're going to go to users, and I've set up a little test user here. It's going to be Matthew. So we'll pull up his profile here. So Matthew Coleman, we'll go to view profile, and this is going to bring up this whole profile. It's got a bunch of tabs. It's basically a one-stop shop for what's going on with this person. But in this particular context, we care about this education tab. This is where we're going to do our work for Iris. And you can see here, I got a few different fields here. The red's telling me there's already something going on I should go fix. And you'll see a bunch of little indicators like that as we go through this. But this is kind of the main game here. These two fields. You have your medical school, which is going to be something that you have to get right for Iris purposes. So we'll start with that. So let's go to med school. And you'll see you'll already have a list of schools entered in here. And the reason for that is like your employers that have the provider number that's kind of linked to Iris, and this is the official number. This is how we identify you. Schools have the same thing. So if I click on Baylor College of Medicine, you'll see that there's a specific code that comes with that, and they use this for all kinds of verifications. So you want to make sure that you're picking the right one, because then we'll apply the right code. You don't need to worry about the code. We manage that side of it. You just got to make sure you're picking the right school. Enter a graduation date and a degree, although this part's kind of just extra, and that will create the medical school record. And you'll be done with that part. One caveat, though, and law schools or a lot of institutions have this, if you have, or if you don't see the medical school on that list, chances are it's because it's a foreign med school, right? Someone's coming in from outside the country and doing residency here. And so all of those get captured under a single kind of catch-all. And this is through, this is how Iris requires. And you can see it's got this fun code, 9999999. That's how you know it's a catch-all. And so basically when you do that, there's one additional thing that you have to enter here as you create the medical school record, and that's their ECFMG information, their cert number and their certification date. And that's kind of just extra verification pieces that the Iris system needs if they're coming from a foreign medical school. So those are your two paths. Either it's a U.S. school, basically just pick them and enter the graduation date. If it's a foreign school, you need to pick the foreign med school option and then enter in the information. But specifically, we're going to be looking for that cert date and the cert number. And that will be required here. If you try to make it without it, it won't let you. Okay, so that's our medical school. And then we have the graduate medical education section. And so I'll just give you a little high level here of why this is important. And so basically, when a resident matches into a residency program, that first program becomes their IRP program. You can see that little label here too. Stands for Initial Residency Program. And this is important because based on that, with a couple of caveats in certain ways, that's the amount of time that that resident can claim full reimbursement, or the place that's educating them can claim full reimbursement for their time. So if you match into internal medicine, that's a 3-year program. So for the next 3 years after that initial match, that institution that's educating them can claim full credit for that time. If there's some kind of delay, it takes longer for that person to finish training, um, they transfer, or for example, they go into fellowship after, for years after a student's or resident's IRP. Once you're past that initial date, so if we're in year 4 for this person, now you can only claim up to half. So that's the big idea with this IRP. So if you add a program, and I'll just edit the existing one here, you'll see that you can choose to set something as the initial residency program. There's some specific caveats here that if you go to Neo, it'll tell you about where, well, there's some programs that will simultaneous match, and there's always edge cases that need to be dealt with. But for the most part, you're probably just picking the program, entering the start and end date for the entire length of the program. So you'd expect something like 3 years here. And then once you're done with that, you want to go into the training details, right? And this is where your institution may vary. Even your region can play with this a little bit. I'll explain what I mean by that. So, you know how typically you finish med school, you take about a month to get to your residency program, just that gap of time. So some regions actually require you to log that gap of time. They look for things like gaps in training history, right? So even though it might seem kind of, well, they haven't even started training yet, there's some places that do look for that. So you might have to make an entry. I'm just going to make up some dates here. So let's just say through the January of 2026, moving and preparing to start residency, right? That becomes the gap. Not everywhere requires that, but it could be a nice thing to have too, just for your own purposes if you're trying to keep track of everyone's time. But some places will actually require that. But for the most part, if you don't have a resident that has a bunch of gaps in their training history that you have to kind of account for, you will mostly be creating these training history entries. And these are very simple. You have your PGY year. You'll see that as you modify that, this year's completed value kind of follows along. That's important because Iris is looking for this, but you're often thinking in PGY 1 years, right? So if it's someone's first year, you think of that of PGY 1, but Iris actually wants that to be years completed 0. That's how they coded it. So that's why we show it to you, but we don't let you touch it. So basically just pick the PGY level. So this is their first year. So I'm going to pick PGY 1. That correctly sets the years completed to 0. You don't have to worry about that. And you just go ahead and you enter those dates. So these dates will be kind of wrong here just to move forward, but that's the idea. You would then add the next training period. So that's going to be 2. Put the dates in and just continue for however long this is. This, in this case, internal medicine would probably be 3 years. You can add comments here if that's important. If it's completed at an external location, so that's a case where maybe you have a transfer that came in, they did their first year somewhere else. You still want to log that first year because you want to have the full training history in here, not just the time they're spending with you. You want to have the whole thing because that'll help make sense of things if there's ever questions about, well, can we claim full time here? Well, they've only been here for 2 years, but wait, they did another year somewhere else. So it becomes a question. You always want to enter the full training history, the whole thing. That way you have it and you don't have to worry about it. And there is also, and this doesn't get used often because it doesn't happen often, but there is a field here for is resident displaced. And so those are for the pretty rare cases where, like a program shuts down unexpectedly somewhere else, and then other residency programs are picking up those residents to help them along. So in those cases, that's what this is talking about. So if you did end up picking up an extra resident, and there's a whole process around that, so you would know if that was happening, And if you check that box, it just does some stuff in the background when we generate the reports, and it changes the calculations a little bit. From your perspective, you don't have to worry about that. You just have to log it. So if they are a displaced resident, you would just identify that here, save it, and you're done. And so that is basically it. You enter their med school, you enter their GME program and training history. If there's any gaps, probably worth logging them. Makes it easier to understand if you ever have to go back and look for details. And then the last thing I'll point out here, because I do see this sometimes. Some programs like to just log that first year. So let's say we have a first year resident just starting with our program. Coordinator will come in here and only enter that first year of training. And they say, oh, I'll do the other ones later. They never do the other ones later. You know, that's typically what we learn when you do an audit later. It's like, oh, we forgot to enter the training history. So our recommendation is when you're creating the residence profile and when you're setting all this up, probably at the start of an academic year, just go ahead and enter the expected training history, even though it hasn't happened yet. Chances are it's going to save some confusion later. So when we do help with process documentation for clients, that's something we always recommend. Just go ahead and put in the whole training history at the front. That way you don't have to remember to do it later. And, you know, questions don't happen, emails don't get sent, everyone's happier. It's basically what it comes down to. And so that's our little section on the history of management. Did we get anything come in, Katie, for questions yet, or should I move on?
No questions yet. So since we've seen institutional setup and history management, where that's kind of the basis of your pillars. So that standard type of process, even if you have regional differences, that gives you the strong foundation for your first two pillars. So moving into scheduling logic, we might see a little more variation for your specific program and how your residents move through it.
Yep. And I'll just jump right into that since it doesn't look like we have questions. So this is that second half now, right? So we just did the demographic. So who is this person? Where they go to med school? What's their training look like? That's that. Now we have to actually put in their schedule. And this is the thing that allows us to claim that time. So when you say, oh, well, they're on this rotation at our hospital for the month of January, that's the signal that tells Medtrics, well, oh, we can claim that time. Better put that in the IRIS report, right? And so basically rotation schedules and this thing called shift schedules, that's the data that ends up in IRIS. Almost everyone that deals with IRIS does the rotation schedule part, right? That's the block schedule, the master schedule. We have different words for it, but it's basically this person's doing the nephrology rotation for the month of January, and that's that. You know, January 1 to January 31st or whatever the dates are. That's a rotation schedule. But what a lot of our clients miss sometimes, and a lot of places miss because it's kind of harder to manage, are shift schedules. So you can claim hours, right? So most places don't think about that. It becomes a little harder to manage, but it can be a source of revenue there, right? Where we have these hours and you can claim visiting residents hours too. If someone comes to work at your clinic from another institution, unless you have some deal with that institution that lets them claim that time, you can claim that time, right? Because you're still providing the environment for educating that resident. So capturing that with shift schedules is kind of the way to go because they're not there for weeks sometimes. You know, they pop in maybe a couple times a month to work at your clinic or something. Those are great for shift schedules, and we can capture that time and include it in the IRIS report. So sometimes there's a little kind of like hidden revenue there that we're just not touching. And then you also sometimes have the concept of overlap. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. So let me go into the system, and we're going to change points of view a little bit here. So we're going to move from that kind of institution level. We're going to move down to the program level, right? So this is where the scheduling actually happens. So I'm already under my program here, internal medicine. So you can see I manage a number of programs, very busy. But this is the internal medicine program. We're going to talk a little bit about how those schedules get linked up ultimately to that employer, right? So if we go look at schedules and we look at rotations, what you're going to find is that every one of these rotations is going to be linked back to a site. And this creates that link. So when you say, okay, I'm going to schedule someone to anesthesiology, that happens at the Medtrics internal clinic. That's how the system knows what employer gets to claim that time, right? Because you've taken Medtrics internal clinic and you've linked it to whatever employer should be claiming that time. And so that's that logical link. When we look at schedules, when you put someone on that rotation, we already know what the site is, so we already know where to claim that time under which employer. So if we go to clinical schedules now, and if you're a user of Medtrics, you're familiar with this page, you hear all the time. I'm not going to go super into the page itself, but very simply, if we look at one of these block schedules, most programs will have something that looks like this. Here are the different blocks we have for the year. We can see that this user has a number of schedules for that year. And for the most part, this is how it looks, right? They're kind of doing one rotation per block. Usually you don't have too many differences there. But sometimes you might have to do something interesting for a different purpose for Medtrics, right? So I have clients where, well, they're on this block, they're on this rotation for this block, but we want an eval to go out for like a slightly different thing and that same time. And the easiest way to make that happen is by giving them a schedule and just allowing our automation to send out evals. That's a different webinar about evals, but that's a common thing that happens, right? And so, okay, they can't be in two places at one time, though. So how does that work, right? So that's why we have this little checkbox here, primary. So basically, when you use that checkbox, even if you have overlapping rotations, they could overlap for a day or the whole thing can overlap, primary wins. It is basically how that goes. So whichever one that you identify as the primary rotation, that's the one that's going to end up in Iris. Any other scheduling things you have there for convenience, for evals, for other reasons, Iris doesn't care. What's the primary? That's what's going there. And you don't have to think about it, really. So for the most part, you probably don't have to deal with overlaps. But if you do, you can use this primary rotation field, identify which schedule is the primary rotation, and the system, when we generate everything, it's going to ignore all the other schedules in that time period and only report out the primary one. So that's a really easy way to, use the system for other purposes, where you don't have to just maintain this really strict schedule. You can get a little creative with what you're doing to use our automations to your advantage, but you can still report clean data out. And so that's what the primary rotation is there for. And so that's your basics. So you have rotations, they're linked to sites. You've already linked those to employers. Now just enter the schedule. You're done. Enter the schedule. If you don't have any overlaps in there, and by the way, if you did accidentally have one, our system's going to tell you about it. We'll go over that in a little bit. But that's it. Basically, put the schedules in. But let's say you got some interesting situations. Shift schedules, we talked about those. So there's kind of two ways that often gets used in Iris consideration. One is the scenario I gave you earlier. You have some visiting residents that come in, whatever sporadic schedule, maybe it's regular schedule, whatever, but they come in for a few hours all the time, and we want to claim that time. That's one thing. That is typically kind of easy because maybe they're not on a rotation schedule at that time. They're just on the shift, so you don't really have to think about it. That's fine. But you can sometimes have a scenario where you have a resident, they're on a rotation for the month, but sometime during that month, they go to an external site to go do some other shift, 8 hours, 4 hours, whatever it is. What do we do then? Especially if you can claim that time under the same employer, it doesn't really matter. It all gets combined together and who cares? But where it gets tricky is where you can't. Luckily, Medtrics handles that for you too. And so I'll just go over the simple way that works. So the same way rotations are tied to a site, an entire shift schedule can also get tied to a site. So if we go look at this shift schedule, and shift schedule is basically a calendar. It's not that complicated. But if you look here, you can see it's tied to this site, the Medtrics School of Medicine. Maybe we don't claim time that people spend there. They claim that time, right? The same way we claim the visiting they send to us, they get to claim the visiting that we send to them. So what we don't want is both entities submitting reports that people are there at the same time. That's going to create problems for both people, right? And so what our system does is it correctly splits this out. So you don't have to think about this. The system will do this automatically. What you want to get right is the site that is linked to the schedule. So like I said, if this shift happens somewhere where you get to claim the time under your same employer, the system basically does nothing. It all gets absorbed into the day of work. Done. But if that time has to go to somewhere else, by linking it to that other site and either linking that site to a different employer or even no employer, right? Basically it just goes into a black hole then, that time. That's what you want to do because you don't want to claim time that you can't claim. That'll give you problems. But ultimately, as long as you get this setting right and attach the site to the right employer or no employer, you don't even have to worry about it. And all you have to do is just schedule them. Right? So, and then the scheduling on this is very simple. We have your shifts in here. You pick who goes to which shift. It's basically Google Calendar. But the important thing behind the scenes is that this entire shift schedule is linked to the correct site. As long as that part is done, the system will take care of the rest when we generate the data. We'll split things up. We'll ignore them. Whatever we need to do. You just worry about getting the scheduling information right. And that's what I was saying when we're talking about demystifying and kind of like just it's demographics and schedules. If that information is accurate, the system will handle the rest. And that's the important thing to think about is how do we do our schedules? And if you get that right, the rest will come to it. Okay. And then comes my favorite part. So people around here know, people in the office listening, data validation. That's my thing. Is the data correct? Is it clean? And so Medtrics has a number of tools that will help you do this. And one of them in particular we're going to talk about is this admin portal dashboard. And if you have a large organization, this is the thing. This is the thing that kind of keeps it in everyone's face and doesn't let them kind of run away from it a little bit. So I'll explain what I mean by that. And so if we go to our internal medicine program, we go to the dashboard, and this is basically the page when a program coordinator logs in, this is where they go. This is where they get routed. And you'll see we got this data dashboard up here. And so we're going to talk a bit more about what's in here, what can be in here. But basically, every time there's a change in the system's data, schedules, demographics, etc., our system is watching. And we're looking for errors. We're trying to identify what's going to be a problem before it officially becomes a problem, right? You can have overlaps, you can have missing med school information, etc. As long as it's dealt with before you submit the report, it's fine, right? You just got to deal with it. And so what we did with this data dashboard is every time you log in, we are running these checks and we're identifying for you what could be a problem for you when you're trying to run Iris later on. And you can see here overlapping rotations. Oops, maybe we forgot to hit the primary button on one of those. Some trainees are missing their med school information. There's gaps between the medical school start date and the residency start date that we haven't dealt with. That's what I was talking about earlier. It's a little regional on who needs that, but we check for that too. And so basically, and technically a whole bunch of other things that are just not shown here. But anytime you have an error, it'll show up here. And this is unique per program, right? So if you keep your program in tip-top shape, you won't even see this. It won't even be there. Done. I'm good. But if it shows up here, this is what we recommend our coordinators to focus on, right? Because what you want to avoid is procrastinating and basically letting everything go until it's the end of the year. And now we're compiling everything. Now I've got a whole stack of errors to deal with that I could have dealt with the whole year. And so that's the idea when we do our kind of process training with clients is this data dashboard. If you just, and this is a little silly, got 30 missing med schools and stuff like that. This is demo data, but it's going to usually be like a couple of things. Whoops, I forgot to enter their social security number. We point that out for you. Who is it? Let's go see. Oh, it's this list of people. We go to their profile, click the button and fix it, right? And so if you have your coordinators go through this on a regular basis, by the time it comes time to submit and audit and do all this stuff, it's already done because you're handling it throughout the year. So this just kind of helps with procrastination and basically puts it in your face all the time. And when you get to it, you can clear it and you feel good when you go to the page and there's nothing to see because you've solved it. It's done. There's no errors, right? And so this data dashboard is one of the primary things. And this is happening on that program level, right? But there's more. So there's also tests and this data review page. So programs do have access to this stuff too, but I'm going to switch to the institution portal a little bit because on the institution portal, you get access to a little bit more. So if we go to Iris here, we go to data review, and data review is kind of the place I like to go. But we'll go to test Iris data first. And this page is nice and important. Basically, every time the Iris data is generated in Medtrics, we are running it through, and I believe the number is 33. So there's basically these 33 different errors that the Iris system on the CMS side is looking for. And every time we generate this data, we are checking to see which of these errors could be a problem for you. So every time you're getting ready for your audit or etc., you can just click here and see all the same kind of problems that the programs see, right? So the program's getting this on the data dashboard is kind of in their face. From the institution level, this is looking at the entire institution, all the programs together. What are the problems that exist? What needs to be handled? And so you can see this all on the one page. Anywhere you see errors, an error means there's something to be handled. Maybe it's an edge case, it's a little misunderstanding, something like that. But you want to do something about this to clear it before you submit this data for processing effectively. And so this test page is super useful. What you'll probably find is a lot of these will never have errors on it because it's kind of like almost hard to get an error on those. But things like overlapping schedules, whoops, we forgot to enter the med school, stuff like that. That will all get picked up in these errors. And these same tests are what's showing up in that data dashboard for each of the program coordinators. And then kind of quickly here. So this data review page, it allows you to do a couple things. One, it allows you to generate the Iris data. So just a little information about how this works in Medtrics. Every night, the system will automatically regenerate your Iris data. So it's kind of just looping through, keeping things up to date so you don't have to worry about it. But what if you get an error? You ask the coordinator to go fix it. They fix it, but then you don't see the result yet. The test is still failing. We haven't regenerated data yet, right? And so these tools at the top here allow you to regenerate the data for everything, a specific site, a specific program, or even an individual if you need to. For a lot of our clients, if you're doing this as a regular process throughout the year, you probably never have to think about this. It's just going to happen. The tests will run. You'll be notified about the test results, and you just kind of handle it as you go through. But if you're kind of doing things more once a year or quarterly or something, it can be helpful to regenerate the data and just make sure the issue is solved. But ultimately, this is what allows you to see the Iris data just real plain. So if we go here and we look at our users, so we have Matthew Coleman, he's kind of our test user we've been looking at here. If we pull it up, this is his Iris data. And you can see the stuff that I didn't enter earlier, the med school, the grad date, that's being flagged here too. It's in red. But this is basically the structure. So this is our employer, Medtrics Hospital. These are the different sites. that can claim that time. This is the time being claimed at that site. If there's gaps in the schedule, that's getting flagged. Gaps can be legitimate. No one's claiming that time, or it could indicate a problem. We're going to flag all the gaps that we see, just in case. Even if, well, they graduated. Well, okay, still a gap. Check it out. Make sure you have the right graduation date, because that has been problems in the past as well. And so this is what the system generates. And now you can see this is a different employer. That's why we have a new master database, which is basically a copy. This is Iris stuff. It has to be this way. But we have the same thing. So this University Medical Center, they claim the data from Medtrics Hospital. Here's the time he spent there. Here are the gaps, etc. So shift schedules, rotation schedules all come in here. And if we see gaps or overlaps between the two sites or the employers, we flag all that stuff. And that's what shows up in the test iris data. But this data review page can be really helpful just to visualize it. It's like, oh, there's a gap in February, but if you come here, you could see like, oh, okay, so he was on pediatric surgery, then it went to cardio. Oh, we missed that week of whatever he was doing that week, right? So it makes it visual, makes it really easy. And so the data review page is one of the first pages I go to if I see an error, but I don't know offhand exactly what's going on. Come here. You'll probably figure it out pretty quick through the different tools that are on here. And then off to our last pillar, which is troubleshooting. So we kind of talked about that a little bit already. The tests, the data dashboard, the data review page, you use all these things together for troubleshooting. So I think, did I already cover most of this? I think I did in just the stuff we talked about. So missing GME history, those tests, great place to look. They'll come right up in the tests. Primary for overlaps, we talked about that. And again, just to reiterate, no matter what you're doing with metrics, you could have 6 concurrent schedules because we're doing some interesting thing with evaluations. As long as you mark one of those things as the primary, that's the one that's going to get reported out for Iris. So that data review page, it's not even going to show that other stuff. It doesn't exist as far as it's concerned because it's not the primary. And just a little note that I'll add here, since it can be important. Let's say you have 2 rotations, but they occur under the same employer. You don't need to care about primary in that case. Some clients, they choose to just always pick a primary when you are overlapping, just as a good habit. But from a technical perspective, if it's happening under the same employer, our system aggregates it all together. It's fine. So when our tests are running, it will call out stuff that's an actual error. It's not going to call out overlaps that don't matter. These are things that are happening at the same place. Same entity is claiming the time. It's fine. And so anytime those errors come up, it's worth your time to go look into them because those are typically legit. What it could be a mistake. Whoops, we added the wrong site to this rotation. Okay, change the site, it's fixed. But it's worth your time to look at those because it's going to save a lot of headaches later on. And then this last one, I do like to talk about this. We talked about some of it, having the coordinators look at that data dashboard on a regular basis. That's the key to it. But I've had a lot of success with clients that move from an annual review to a biannual or quarterly. And what that can mean is we're not looking at the whole year. We're just looking at this quarter. What are the errors in this quarter? And so by making it a more frequent thing, that kind of forces the coordinators to keep more attention on that data dashboard and keep it more up to date, right? Because they really can't procrastinate because they're going to have to get it right for the quarterly review anyway. And I've actually had some interesting stories where we've gone from annual to biannual to quarterly, and then we just started going back to biannual and annual because everyone was doing it. So everyone just kind of got into the habit, which is nice to see. But sometimes to kind of kickstart that habit, you could do some more frequent reviews, and that can get everyone in the mood to do it. It's like, I might as well do it. And they'll learn that once you get to it, it's not that hard to fix, right? It's just usually fixing dates and stuff like that. And so you just got to get in the habit, really. And one little hack that you can do to assist with that kind of concept is one of those pro tips, right? It's not really correct, so to speak, but it can help with this. You can modify your fiscal year. So if you're doing a quarterly review and you want to make sure that you don't get data from the other quarters like mucking up the works, you can just modify the end date, shorten the fiscal year, regenerate your iris data, and now you're only looking at data from that quarter. Some clients have found that helpful to keep everyone focused on what we're talking about, right? Ultimately, you do want to switch that back because you don't want to submit a quarterly fiscal year, but some clients have had success with just kind of shortening that fiscal year, running their reporting, making sure everything's solid for that quarter, and then expanding it back out. So just a little pro tip there. It can be done, depends on your institution a little bit, but it can be helpful. And so that kind of brings us to the end, about on time, it looks like. So those are the five main pillars, right? But ultimately, what is it? It's demographics and schedules. If we get that stuff right, then the system will take care of the rest. We'll let you know if anything's wrong. If not, you're probably in the clear.
We've gone through the 5 pillars, and we still have time to go over this survey really quick for your feedback and then Q&A. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. But if you scan this QR code or head to the link, you can let us know what you thought of the webinar today, and also what ideas do you have for future webinars. We are open to your suggestions. If it's something related to the platform itself or something broader with medical education, veterinary medicine, nursing. Our December webinar was about AI and medical education. So we are game for any topic. So the survey is just 4 quick questions and an open field for those suggestions. So please send those our way. Let's see, I haven't seen a question in the chat yet.
Well, I've explained everything so thoroughly that it's impossible to have a question, Katie. That's why.
So, thinking of, after seeing this webinar, kind of demystifying some of these things about iris reports, it sounds like, Chris, maybe one of the main recommendations is just getting into the system frequently, reviewing that data frequently. It's
the routine of it, really,
Yeah.
is what it comes down to. And so, especially the larger the organization, right? If you're a smaller organization, you work in a smaller office, you can get to people, you can talk to them, and, it tends to work out. With the larger the organization, the more important it is to get people in the habit. And also, sometimes I found it helpful, sort of like I did at the beginning. Why are we doing this? Right? So I know when I've worked with some new program coordinators over time, I've gotten questions like, why do we do evaluations? Why do we do this? Like, what is the end goal of this? And so sometimes I've found it helpful to actually instruct people, and as part of the training process, the onboarding process, to just say, well, this is Iris. It's very important because this, and this. And ultimately, the reason we can hire you is because the government pays us. And the way we get paid is by doing these Iris reports. And so, if you do something like that, people go like, oh, okay. So this is how I get money. Okay, I'll get this right. I got you. And so, I've had that success at some clients. It's just, why are we doing this? Why is it important? Sometimes that's all you need as the spark, and people get into it. Other times, they need more of a helping hand. But I think it's more that kind of gradual nudge and say, hey, we're doing our quarterly coming up. Did you handle your data dashboard stuff? If they did, they don't have anything to worry about. So it's the routine of it is ultimately what it is.
Thank you for attending. We will be sending out a recording of the webinar with a link to the survey. So please send us your ideas. And we will see you again in February with another webinar.
Thanks all. Thanks for listening to me. Bye.